Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you. Hope you had an absolutely fantastic Memorial Day weekend. Hope you honored our veterans for the tremendous sacrifice that they have made and the service that they render to our wonderful country. It's great to be back with you. We are continuing our study of the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15. Now, here are the connections that I've been sharing with you. 1 Corinthians 15 is the resurrection of Romans chapter 8. That's admitted by virtually everyone. In Romans chapter 8, Paul discusses the suffering of this present time. That's Paul's present time. And the suffering that he was talking about, look, folks, it was absolutely not related to the normal human experience. It was persecution for the cause of Christ. It was first century tribulation. Then, he likewise said, the whole creation groans in labor pains until now. This labor pains concept is well attested throughout the Old Testament. Birth pangs of Messiah is what it is called, having to do with the last days, having to do with, in the Jewish narrative, look, as I've shared with you, this is a well-known, well-documented motif that in the last days, in the last generation before the resurrection, the Jews believed, pardon me, that Elijah would come, you would have the great tribulation, you would have the great apostasy, man of sin type thing. Then you would have the coming of the Lord for the judgment, the resurrection, and the kingdom. Once again, I mean, this is found throughout the Old Testament. By the way, I document that this narrative, all right, this timeline of events, Elijah, tribulation, apostasy, coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection, I document for you from passage after passage in the Old Testament, not only that, how Jesus followed that very identical narrative. The apostles in the rest of the New Testament followed that timeline of events. You know, we can talk very often about the Jews didn't understand this, they didn't understand the nature of the kingdom, etc. Well, that's true. But when it came to following the narrative and the timeline of Jewish eschatology, they followed it to the T. Not in nature, but in time. Okay. So I've been sharing with you about the concept of the tribulation and its relationship to resurrection. Essentially, the argument is this. If it's the case that the tribulation would occur immediately before and lead into the resurrection, and if it's true that the tribulation was to occur in the first century, then it must be true that the resurrection was to occur in the first century. Well, it is true that the tribulation would lead directly to the resurrection. And it is true that the tribulation was to be in the first century. Therefore, it must be true that the resurrection was to be in the first century. Now, I've shared with you over and over how the tribulation is inextricably linked with the judgment of Israel. That's what Jesus did in Matthew 24. It's what the Old Testament prophets did. Now watch, pardon me, I've shared with you in the book of Revelation how we have absolute proof that the tribulation was to be a first century event. By the way, here momentarily I'll make a very special offer on my book, Blast from the Past, The Truth About Armageddon, that absolutely 100% proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the tribulation was in fact in the first century. You'll want this. Anyway, I shared with you that John, writing in the book of Revelation, said, what? He was in the tribulation. The tribulation. Now, in chapter 11, I want to show you this incredible relationship between the fall of Jerusalem, tribulation, and resurrection. And by the way, this connection likewise shows the absolute connection that is established in Daniel chapter 12, 1 and 2, where Daniel foresaw the great tribulation and the resurrection, all of which would occur at the time when the power of the holy people is completely shaken. Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11, we find the fall of the city, quote, where the Lord was slain, unquote. Do we have any problem with who that was? I mean, is there any question about where Jesus was crucified? He wasn't slain in Rome. He was not slain in New York City. He wasn't slain in Mecca, as Joel Richardson attempts to identify Babylon of Revelation, conveniently overlooking the fact that Jesus was slain in the streets, as it were, of Jerusalem. All right? Here is the fall of Jerusalem in Revelation 11, verse 8 and 9. Directly related to that, connected to that, is the sounding of the seventh trumpet. Well, the sounding of the seventh trumpet is what? It's the last trumpet, and Paul said the resurrection is at the sounding of the last trumpet. 1 Corinthians 15, 50 and 51. Last trumpet, seventh trumpet. Resurrection at the last trumpet, resurrection at the seventh trumpet. Revelation 11. So in Revelation chapter 11, at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. He shall reign forever and ever. What happens at the sounding of the seventh trumpet? Oh, by the way, do you see the irony? In Matthew chapter 4, Satan took Jesus to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and said, I will give them all to you if you will but fall down and worship me. Jesus refused, obviously, but here in Revelation chapter 11, what does Jesus with the Father receive? All the kingdoms of the world. What he refused to receive at the hands of Satan, he now receives from the Father himself. Because now he has put down his enemies. Now he has conquered Satan. The irony here, the wonderful, wonderful irony here is incredible. And you know what? I'm already out of time. I apologize for that. So, in tomorrow's video, I will continue in Revelation chapter 11. But here's something that you have to see. Revelation chapter 11 is the time of the reception of the kingdom. This is Daniel chapter 7. At the time of the judgment of the little horn, the persecuting power. When the kingdoms of the world are given to the saints. Okay? It's also 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Entrance into the kingdom at the time of the resurrection. You see all of these connections? These are marvelous, wonderful, and perfect connections, all of which absolutely ties the consummation to the time of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Why? Well, here's Revelation chapter 8. Fall of Jerusalem, the city where the Lord was slain, sounding the seventh trumpet. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God. Okay, I'm out of time for this morning. I have an extensive discussion of all of this in my book, Who is This Babylon? let me encourage you to get a copy of this book. This book has been called groundbreaking. It was peer-reviewed by the Russian Academy of Sciences that said this book needs to be distributed everywhere and understood. Now, if you go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, if you order this book, I will send you free of charge a copy of my book, Blast from the Past, The Truth About Armageddon. In this little book, you will find absolute definitive proof that Armageddon, the Great Tribulation, absolutely occurred in the first century. And don't forget, the resurrection and the tribulation are temporally tied together. When the tribulation would occur, it would lead directly to the resurrection. Go to my website, order Who Is This Babylon? Remind me that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I will send you free of charge Blast from the Past. All right, thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. We'll see you on the flip side.